In the 70s, my parents moved from India to the US. My dad was the first to come. He studied at UCLA for his master's, so that's what brought him to Los Angeles. And then later on, they got married, and then my mom came as well. And in 1975, my mom is a Bharatanatyam dancer, which is a style of South Indian dance. So she came in the 70s, and she was a dancer, like a well-known dancer, and she was making strides in Bombay, which is where she grew up, as a performer, choreographer, teacher. And she came here, and she wanted to continue that. So she started one of the first dance schools in America. In the 1975 is when she officially started Shakti Dance Company, Shakti Dance School, which is her school, which still runs today, and she still has students and they're performing. And so she started that school in the 70s. My father was working, he was an engineer, and then he did something pretty amazing. He retired from his job. He left his job early to help my mom run her dance school, to help her focus on the dance so he can run all the other day-to-day stuff. And he also raised me pretty much because my mom was very busy. Of course, she raised me too, but like he would take me to my music classes. He would take me to my karate tournaments. He would take me to India to study and be with me for 2 months at a time. And so art and focusing on art was really like a prized thing in our family. So I grew up with that. I was studying in LA with music teachers who were from India, but they also, like my mother, they came, they settled, they started a music school, and I was learning from them. And I was really making strides and progress, and then eventually my teacher said, I think you should go to India and study more intensively, like get to that next level. So starting in the summer of 1999, my father would take me every winter and summer vacation, and I would study with gurus there. And then sometimes I would go alone, and I would stay in my guru's house, and I would train for the summer. And it was like round the clock learning and just being around. It's not just the classes, it's just being in the environment of your teacher's home, what they do, how they live and breathe the music, how we discuss music at dinner, how we listen to music together. Those are the things that, even more than the classes, taught me a lot. I imbibed that, and I didn't get, when you're in LA and you drive 40 minutes for class, you have a 1-hour class and you come home, you don't get that same kind of soaking in of the atmosphere of the music. And so those experiences really are what led me to go deeper and deeper into Carnatic music. And I started making strides. I started performing solo concerts by the time I was about 12, 13. And so Ravi Shankar, Pandit Ravi Shankar, who I called Guruji at the time, he lived in Encinitas, which is not too far from Los Angeles. He was aware of my mom and her work, and he's always looking for a young talent. He's such an open-minded, broad-minded person, and he had heard that there was this kid from LA who we knew as just this little kid that was playing with cars and just obsessed with playing and not music. He eventually heard that I was performing concerts and I was serious about music, and so he called me to come sing at his house in Encinitas when I was 15. And he said, just prepare 30 minutes of music. I just want to hear you. And this ended up being my audition, which I didn't know. And when I went there, there was guests. He had invited a small audience, so I was a little bit nervous. But it didn't feel like an audition because he was sitting right in the front and he was keeping the beats, he was smiling, and then he started talking to me and asking me questions, and then that half an hour thing that I prepared became like a 2-hour concert almost. And he really made me feel comfortable and at ease, and I think it went well because he called me back while he was touring in Russia. He called my parents and said, would your son be able to take off 3 months from school, senior year, to tour with me? And my parents didn't even ask me. They said, yes, he can. Because they knew I would say yes. And we worked it out with my school that I was able to leave school and do the classes on my own through emails and having a tutor who would teach me virtually. And it was truly an incredible time, and I'm lucky. Yeah. When I went to UCLA, I knew music was gonna be my life, like gonna be my future, because that was what I was obsessed about. And also, Guruji, Ravi Shankar also told me, he said, I really think you need to focus on music. Like, you have to be a musician. And hearing that from someone like him was like a no-brainer. Like, that's the ultimate reassurance that I was looking for. And so I wanted to do something. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to do something related to music. So at the music college, it made sense because of the exposure. There was a Indian music department in that UCLA department. So there was a connection, and also it broadened my scope to many different styles of music: Chinese music, Arabic music, jazz music, all sorts of styles that I had never really heard or been exposed to. And so to me, it was a no-brainer choice to go to UCLA, and that really opened my eyes to the world of jazz music. Jazz was something that I didn't really quite understand, and I still struggle to understand. It's very complex from my understanding, but there was, being around jazz musicians, I saw a similarity between the rigor of practice and the obsession with listening to like old recordings, and I saw a lot of overlap. And my friends who were brilliant jazz musicians and I really connected on that. And then I started getting my feet a little bit more wet with listening to more jazz standards, listening to more things, and I threw myself into a jazz composition class, which was deep waters for me. And I definitely struggled, but it opened my eyes to this world that I didn't know before. And so I was very interested in that dialogue between the music that I consider my language and this new music that I was being exposed to. And that's kind of, I think the curiosity is what really sparked it. It wasn't about, oh, I need to start a fusion ensemble, I need to start a band. That wasn't the driving factor. It was more that a bunch of friends got together and they had questions about each other's music. We practiced together and we just played a lot of music together. We hung out a lot together. We spoke music. And then we happened to be like, okay, we might as well be a band. We're performing anyway, so that's how it started.
Yeah. Where have you traveled together?
We've traveled all over the U.S. We've traveled to India. We did a tour in India in 2016, which is really cool to bring this side of which I feel is more like my American identity, bring it to India, where I usually only do Carnatic, the traditional concert. So it was nice to bring this group and bring my friends to India. That was very special. Yeah, and we've toured in Singapore as well, in Taiwan. Yeah. Growing up, like I said, Carnatic music was my language. It's what I knew of music, and it was my identity, being a vocalist, a Carnatic vocalist, and that Carnatic sound was me. But I'm also an LA-born kid. I was born in the US, I grew up here, and I didn't find a place for that voice to feel like it belonged. I always felt like an outsider. And I think it wasn't the sole reason, but it was a big reason why I searched for crossover genres, to find accessibility in my voice in the West, and not just be like, oh, this is an ancient traditional style, but what does it have to do with our modern times? There was always this bifurcation between Carnatic being traditional and old, and you're modern and of today. So how do you make sense of something that's so old? And so for me, I realized when I had time to reflect on everything, all my experiences with Ravi Ji, with Akram Khan, with T.M. Krishna, who was my mentor, and R.K. Sriram Kumar, another mentor of mine. All these experiences synthesized during the pandemic when everything was canceled. I had no distractions, no concerts to work for. I just had time to sit with my thoughts. And I saw that this problem in me feeling like there's a traditional ancient side of me, and then to make it modern, I needed jazz, or I needed some sort of Western element to validate myself being modern and of today. And I also realized that I was putting myself into these two slots, these two parallel journeys of the Carnatic traditional and the modern contemporary crossover genre. And at one point, I prided myself on straddling these two worlds. But when I realized it, it became tiring to constantly navigate. And I felt like I hadn't found a centricity in my voice. There was always these two poles and these two slots that kind of society and success kind of molds what you should be in these two slots. And so I guess this album and the process of working on Isolation was about isolating myself from those structures. It was about finding what do I want to do, not what and mind you, these are my mentors and my well-wishers that have kind of, they've shaped me, but they've also, I realized I wasn't able to find my voice, what I wanted to say. And so this was that search about, it had these two poles, but what, I want to try and come closer to the center. It's like a search for that center. And that center is me. And that center is what I want to say, what I feel deeply. And so I don't find the music in Isolation jazz. I don't find it Carnatic. I don't find it crossover genre. I don't find it traditional. I don't find it modern. I just find it just an expression of what I'm going through, or I went through during that time. And it was just mostly about that. In order to find my voice and find what I want to say, I had to look at the history of where Carnatic music was this tradition that I practiced, and it's said to be an ancient tradition. We believe it as practitioners that it's thousands of years old. It's passed down from guru to student, and here we are today, and we're connected to this past. There's this straight, easy line, and it's naive to think that, but we just do because we just want to sing. We want to sing concerts, and I knew if I wanted to learn more about finding that centricity, I had to go into the history of this music that that I didn't know about. And so in that process of learning about the history of Carnatic music, I saw that it wasn't so simple. It wasn't just an ancient tradition. It's changed a lot over time, and it involves oppression. It involves erasing marginalized voices. It involves, and these are the voices who really were the custodians of the art form. They were the upkeepers of the art form. They created the sound. They built the repertoire that we sing today, and those are the voices that are basically being erased, and they don't really practice. And it's a matter of caste privilege, and this is a word that I didn't even know. I didn't talk about, but it's been on my mind a lot as I've learned that caste oppression has been a part of the history of Carnatic music, and it's been a part of it then, and it is a part of it now. And so because I come from caste privilege, which is funny because I didn't realize, because I thought I was coming from a minority position, because in America, my culture isn't the majority. And the music I practice is marginalized in a way. It's not the mainstream. It's not supported the same way other styles of music are, that are more mainstream and more, let's say, Western. So to realize that actually, no, my voice, the fact that I'm able to perform and have a platform and be able to study from the best gurus, be able to be encouraged to sing, be allowed to sing, period, is a privilege. And so many of those voices have not had that privilege. And that kind of shook me, and it showed that my privilege has a responsibility. I can't just sing anymore. I can't just do things because, oh, I do Carnatic music and I do crossover genre. There has to be more thought. And so that the weight of that, coming to terms with that privilege, has kept me vigilant, and to not take things for granted, and to keep learning and making mistakes. The fact that I didn't look into my history for so long was a mistake. The fact that I didn't acknowledge, even though that there were books and even my own mentor talked a lot about this problematic history, I still didn't care to engage with it until the pandemic, or until I had time. And so everything I'm saying now is really, is just, is in flux. I'm constantly learning, and I think that's what I've learned the most, is that you have to always be in a state of accepting that you might not know, but there's always space to grow and learn, and there's never a fixed point where you know everything. We'll have to see how my music evolves, but I'm sure it will. I mean, this is just one station along in the journey. We often think art doesn't have the power to change, but change happens in culture, and change happens in attitudes. It's not just policy or law. A lot of those can be changed when there is enough demand from the culture. And so music is so tied to culture. Dance, any sort of art is so tied to culture. And I think when we start having these more open dialogues and start using art as a space for transformation, rather than, there is a space for art as entertainment and giving us some relief from the heaviness of all the crises that you mentioned, from climate to environment to mental. There is value for art being that source of relief from that, but there's also value in it letting us converse about it and like find ways of dealing with it. Each artist has their own way of interpreting it, and so you get different views, and you just, even sparking a conversation after hearing a piece of music is something that is an important first step, is just talking about something. I've had 4 mentors on Isolation, and I've never had mentors on an album. But luckily they're all incredible artists, and they were very free during the pandemic. I wouldn't have ever been able to get their time, but they were Akram Khan, who is a choreographer, dancer, T.M. Krishna, who's my mentor and guru, who's based in India. He's a musician, an activist, an author. Aditya Prakash, who's my sister, who's a Bharatanatyam dancer and choreographer. And Vincenzo Lamagna, who's a musician, composer. He composed the music score for Akram Khan's production, which I toured with, called Xenos. That's how I met Akram, and I started working with him, is because I was a singer in this production, which Vince composed. And they've all shaped me in some way or the other, and I was so lucky to have them as mentors on the album. So I would send them drafts of the song, and we would get into conversations of what worked, what didn't work, what is the song about, what is your direction, what are you trying to say. We would have all these conversations, and that's potentially why I went through 30, 40 drafts of each song. I would get, and I would never do that before. It would be just like, whatever I like, I put out. And this was the first time where I really had time to introspect and like critique and get feedback, which I think is such an important thing in arts, is getting feedback from people that you respect and being open to that. It's hard to get your piece ripped apart, but it also allows you to build something that you never thought possible. And so Akram Khan is one of those mentors, and he's seen me on my journey and my development, and he was, when I showed him the album at its final stage, he just, I think in his excitement, he said, I want to create a film for one of your songs. And so we started with this song, Insurgents, and that song is a response to the kind of violent rhetoric, the divisive tone that is just plaguing our societies everywhere. And his take on that piece was, because he is a father, a recent father, and what are we passing on to our next generation? There's no sense of inclusivity, there's no sense of love. Everything is about division and us versus them. And that kind of attitude, is that what we're passing on to our next generation? The piece itself was a response for me from seeing Capitol Hill insurgency, and yeah, so that was really the starting point, just seeing the kind of anger and the whirlwind of violence that happened there, and to know that it was people that were educators or ex-policemen, ex-firemen, just you don't think of those people as extremists, but that switch can get flipped really quick to go to the other side, to act on anger, act on us versus them. And so that feeling really sat with me. And so that song was a response to that feeling, that we can switch over to the side of rage and anger at any point. And so that's the kind of driving force behind that piece. And it's a film that we've finished. It's a short film, and we're at the moment submitting it to film festivals, so we can't release it until after that. It's under consideration. So just love and pure being, and the wave is the ego, the small part that doesn't accept the larger within. So yeah, it's more that metaphor of that.